I was halfway through cleaning my fishing gear on the back deck of my lake house when I heard the knock. Not just any knock, 3 sharp, impatient raps that practically screamed, "I think I own this place." I turned around, wiping my hands on a rag, and there she was. Shoulder-length bleached hair, oversized sunglasses despite the cloud cover, clipboard in hand, and the permanent frown of someone who had just smelled a fart. Her name was Brenda. Brenda Whitmore, the self-appointed queen of the Lake Pine Estates HOA. "Mr. Lanes," she said, not even trying to hide the disgust in her voice. "We need access to the interior of your property for an emergency inspection." I raised an eyebrow. "Emergency? What kind of emergency requires my house keys?" She didn't flinch. "We've received an anonymous tip about non-approved renovations on your deck. As per HOA protocol, I'll need your keys so I can conduct a thorough inspection while you're out." That's when I knew this wasn't just HOA overreach, this was personal. "Brenda," I said, "you're not getting my keys. You've got no warrant, no legal right, and no emergency. You have a problem? Send me a violation notice like everyone else." Her lips curled like I just slapped her with a trout. "If you refuse, I'll have to escalate this to the HOA board. You could face daily fines, possibly a lien." I didn't even blink. "You do that." She turned on her heel and stomped off, her little white heels sinking slightly into the grass, muttering something about non-compliance and a full audit. I wasn't new to HOA drama. I'd bought the lake house 2 years ago, mostly to get away from the chaos of city life and enjoy some peace and fishing. But Brenda had made it her mission to micromanage every inch of the neighborhood. She fined a retired vet for having a flagpole, tried to ban kayaks from being stored outside. The woman was a walking lawsuit waiting to happen, still trying to get into my home. That crossed a line. That night, I called the number I'd kept tucked away for emergencies, Martin Creeley, the actual president of the HOA board. A former accountant, Martin was quiet, methodical, and absolutely tired of Brenda's nonsense. "She asked for your keys," he said, voice tight. "Demanded," I corrected. "Tried to make it sound official." There was a pause on the line, then a sigh. "That's not just overreach. That's criminal trespass if she acts on it." "Glad we're on the same page." Martin told me he'd handle it, but I wasn't done yet. I installed a new set of cameras, one facing the driveway, one on the back porch. I wasn't about to trust that Brenda wouldn't try something while I was out fishing. 3 days later, I got the proof I needed. I came home to find the back gate slightly ajar. Nothing stolen, but when I checked the footage, there she was, Brenda, wearing a wide-brimmed sun hat, walking around my deck with a measuring tape. She never entered the house, but she was clearly snooping. I sent the footage to Martin. The response was immediate. By the next morning, the video had already made its rounds through the proper channels. Martin called me just after sunrise while I was cleaning out the hull of my skiff. His voice was tight, but there was a rhythm to it, like he'd had a pot of coffee and a long night of reviewing bylaws. "She trespassed," he said. "We've got it on tape, and she wasn't acting with board approval. I've scheduled an emergency board meeting for this evening. I want you there." I asked him what the goal was. "To vote on her removal," he said flatly, "and to file a formal complaint with the county. This isn't just an HOA matter anymore." The meeting was held at the community center, a squat brick building that still smelled faintly of varnish and mildew. By 6:30, the place was packed. Word had spread fast. Brenda's name was floating on every whisper, every sideways glance. Most of the community had grown fed up with her, but until now, no one had been able to pin her down with anything concrete. I took a seat near the front, next to a retired electrician named Don, who had once been fined for having an unauthorized exterior light fixture, which turned out to be a solar-powered porch lamp from Home Depot. Martin opened with the footage. He connected his laptop to the projector, brought up the surveillance clip, and let it play in silence. Camera angle 1 showed Brenda ducking under my back gate. Angle 2 caught her stepping onto my deck and pulling out a small notepad, scribbling furiously. She paced along the railing, counted planks, and took photos with her phone. Martin didn't narrate. He let the images speak for themselves. When the footage stopped, he turned to the board 5 members, all volunteers, seated behind a folding table. None of them looked surprised. A few looked exhausted. "This behavior," Martin said, "violates Section 8, Paragraph 4 of our HOA Charter. No board member may enter private property without written consent or a court-issued warrant." She had neither. A woman with silver hair and a red turtleneck leaned in. "Has she done this before?" I stood. "She tried to get me to hand over my keys 2 days earlier. Said it was an emergency inspection. When I refused, she came on my property anyway." One of the other board members, a younger guy with a pressed shirt and a Bluetooth earpiece still in, asked, "Did she damage anything?" "No, but she didn't need to. She crossed a line." I paused. "And she knew it." There was a low murmur across the room. A few people nodded. A man near the back stood up and said, "She fined me for leaving my grill uncovered overnight. Then she said she'd waive the fine if I volunteered for her so-called beautification committee." Another woman followed. "She told me I couldn't have wind chimes, said they were a noise hazard." Martin raised a hand. "We'll take statements after the vote. Right now, we need to decide whether to remove Brenda Whitmore from the board, effective immediately." The vote was unanimous. No abstentions, no objections. The moment the result was read aloud, the door at the back of the room swung open. Brenda. She walked in like she owned the place, dressed in a tailored blazer and carrying a thin manila folder under her arm. She didn't look at anyone. Just marched straight to the front and dropped the folder on the table. "What is this?" she asked. "Some kind of ambush?" Martin kept his voice measured. "We just voted. You've been removed, effective immediately." "You can't do that without me present." Don leaned forward. "You weren't invited." Brenda's eyes landed on me. "You orchestrated this." "I didn't move. You did this to yourself." She turned to the board, voice rising. "This is retaliation. He's breaking multiple guidelines." "That deck was extended past regulation length and I have documentation." Martin opened the folder she dropped. Inside were photos of my deck, annotated with sloppy handwriting and post-it notes quoting irrelevant code. "This is inadmissible," he said. "You gathered this while trespassing." "It's not only invalid under our charter, it's illegal." Brenda's tone shifted. She started pacing. "I did what I had to. He's not the only one. Half of this community is in violation and no one's enforcing anything. I was the only one keeping standards." "You were harassing residents," said the woman in the red turtleneck. "That's not enforcement, that's power tripping." Brenda's face flushed red as she spun toward Martin. "You'll hear from my attorney." He didn't flinch. "You might want to speak to one anyway, because I've already forwarded the trespass footage to the county sheriff's office." That stopped her cold. She stared at him for a second, then turned back to me. Her voice dropped, low and venomous. "You think you've won something here?" I met her gaze. "No, I think the neighborhood did." She stormed out without another word. The next morning, I got a call from Deputy Holloway with the county sheriff's department. He'd reviewed the footage and wanted a formal statement. I met him at the sheriff's substation that afternoon, brought a copy of the video files, and answered every question he had. "Has she done anything like this before?" he asked. I told him about what others had said at the meeting, including the fine for labor shakedown and the wind chime ban. He nodded slowly, scribbling notes into a thick legal pad. "We'll be reaching out to the HOA board," he said. "If she's been using her position to access private property or leverage fines for personal favors, that's not just a civil violation. That's criminal coercion, maybe even extortion." The investigation moved faster than I expected. Within a week, 3 other residents gave formal statements. One even had a voicemail Brenda had left, threatening to revoke landscaping privileges unless she painted her shutters a more appropriate shade. It was absurd and damning. 2 weeks after the board meeting, Brenda was officially charged with misdemeanor trespassing and unlawful use of her HOA position to access private property. The sheriff's office issued a notice to appear, and she was served at her home in front of two very curious neighbors. The HOA board, meanwhile, began rewriting sections of the charter to prevent anything like this from happening again. They added language requiring all inspections to be requested in writing, approved by a quorum, and conducted with the homeowner present. No exceptions. Martin called me again. This time he sounded almost cheerful. "We've got a new board member to replace her," he said. "You might know her, Marlene, the retired teacher." I did. She'd lived on the street behind mine. Calm, fair, and had once organized a block potluck that didn't devolve into passive-aggressive casserole competitions. "She's already drafting new transparency policies," Martin continued. "Brenda's grip is officially gone, and we're not going back." That evening I walked out onto my deck. The lake was still, reflecting the soft orange of the setting sun. Somewhere across the water, a loon called. I sat down, cracked open a cold one, and finally let myself relax. The house keys stayed right where they belonged in my pocket. The following weekend, I was on the dock untangling a line when Marlene approached with a clipboard tucked under her arm, not the weaponized kind Brenda used to carry, but one with actual meeting notes and a smile that didn't feel like it had been surgically applied. She wore worn-in tennis shoes and a faded sweatshirt from a local botanical garden. "I've got a question for you," she said, stopping at the edge of the dock. I looked up, shielding my eyes from the early morning glare. "Depends." "Does it involve me giving up house keys or repainting my shed?" She laughed, the real kind. "No, nothing like that. We're documenting past board decisions. Turns out Brenda wasn't keeping proper records. A lot of the fines she issued don't have supporting paperwork." I reeled in the loose line and set the rod aside. "Let me guess, some of those fines were never approved." "Exactly, and some of the ones that were collected, we can't find where the money went." That got my attention. "How much are we talking?" I asked. "We're still digging, but the preliminary tally is around 31,000, and that's just over the past year." I stood. "You're telling me she was pocketing HOA fines? We're not jumping to conclusions yet." "But there are missing deposits, and some checks were made out directly to her. She told the previous treasurer they were reimbursements for enforcement expenses." I rubbed my jaw. "And no one questioned that?" She had a way of making people nervous. "The last treasurer resigned after Brenda accused her of data mishandling. We pulled her back in as a consultant. She showed us emails Brenda had deleted from the shared drive." I stepped off the dock and followed Marlene up the path toward the road. "So what happens now?" We reported it. "The county's Financial Crimes Unit is reviewing the HOA's books. If they find evidence of embezzlement, it won't stop at misdemeanor trespassing." By Tuesday, the sheriff's office had escalated the matter. A uniformed deputy stopped by to ask a few follow-up questions. Not about the trespassing this time. They wanted to know if Brenda had ever offered to waive violations in exchange for favors or work. "Did she ever suggest you could avoid fines if you did something for her?" the deputy asked, flipping open a small notepad. "She tried to get me to donate labor for her so-called inspection committee," I said. "I told her no. That was the last time she came by before she trespassed." The deputy nodded. "We've got two others reporting something similar. One guy says she offered to overlook a patio extension if he helped repave her driveway. Sounds like a pattern, more like a racket." 2 days later, detectives executed a search warrant on Brenda's house. It happened early in the morning, right after sunrise. A few of us watched from the corner across the street as 2 unmarked vehicles pulled up and a pair of investigators stepped out. They were inside for nearly an hour. When they came out, they were carrying a desktop computer, a red accordion folder, and a small safe. Word spread faster than wildfire in dry brush. Marlene called an emergency meeting that night, not just with the board, but with the entire community. For the first time, every single seat in the community center filled. People stood in the back and along the walls. Nobody wanted to miss what came next. She didn't waste time. Based on evidence collected this week, she began, we've learned that over $37,000 of HOA funds were misappropriated over a 14-month period. The former acting enforcement chair, Brenda Whitmore, is the primary suspect in an ongoing investigation. A collective gasp moved through the room like a slow wave. Marlene held up a printed chart. These funds were collected through unauthorized fines, personal reimbursements with no receipts, and fabricated maintenance invoices. We're working with the county to determine how much of that money can be recovered. A man in the third row, Gary, who ran the bait shop off Route 12, raised his hand. What happens to the rest of us? He asked. The ones who paid those fines without knowing they weren't legit. We're drafting a reimbursement plan, Marlene said. It'll take time, but current dues will be redirected toward it. No new fines will be issued until an independent auditor reviews every policy. Are we suing her? Asked a woman near the back, arms crossed. That's up to the district attorney, Marlene replied, but I'll tell you this, the HOA will cooperate fully. We're done being silent. In the following days, the tone of the entire neighborhood changed. A handyman who used to work on several homes said he was asked by Brenda to install a shed behind her house, paid for with HOA funds. He had the invoice and canceled check to prove it. 2 former board members came forward with emails Brenda had sent, pressuring them into approving routine enforcement disbursements, without seeing actual documentation. One of them had tried to push back and was told in writing that she would be relieved of her duties for undermining board cohesion. The county forensic accountant found evidence of multiple checks deposited into a personal account registered to a shell landscaping company, one that had no business license, no insurance, and no employees other than Brenda's nephew, a 19-year-old who had once been seen mowing only her lawn. The final blow came when the district attorney filed formal charges: 2 counts of felony embezzlement, 1 count of wire fraud, and 3 counts of unlawful coercion under the state's HOA abuse statute. Brenda was arrested quietly at a cousin's house 2 counties away. No cameras, no flashing lights, just a clean, clinical end to her reign of petty tyranny. We heard about it from the sheriff's office the next day. The safe they'd recovered from her house contained cash, handwritten ledgers, and a list of priority violators, homeowners she had marked for increased scrutiny. My name was at the top. The board held a vote to dissolve the old enforcement committee entirely. In its place, they formed a new oversight body made up of volunteers who weren't allowed to serve more than 1 year at a time. All violations now had to be documented with time-stamped photos, reviewed by at least 3 members, and approved by the full board before being issued. Marlene asked me to join the oversight group. I told her I'd consider it, but I liked my mornings quiet and my hands smelling like bait, not bureaucracy. Still, I agreed to help draft the new protocol. It was the least I could do. One afternoon, while reviewing old digital records with Martin and Marlene, we found something odd: a series of emails between Brenda and a developer who had been lobbying to purchase a stretch of undeveloped shoreline behind the neighborhood. She'd been advocating for a zoning change, using her position to make the homes in the area seem increasingly non-compliant and uncooperative. Her goal was to create a paper trail of dysfunction that would justify a buyout. She wanted the neighborhood to look like a sinking ship, I said, scrolling through the messages, so she could sell it off to a developer for a profit. She was preparing to be the one person holding the lifeboat, Martin added. Marlene sat back, shaking her head. And we almost let her. The board sent the emails to the district attorney. They added a charge of attempted fraudulent misrepresentation to the case. At the next community gathering, the mood was light for the first time in a long while. Kids played in the grass while neighbors shared homemade chili and passed around cornbread. Someone brought a cooler full of sweet tea, and Gary from the bait shop grilled sausages on a portable smoker. Marlene stood on a folding step stool and raised her voice. We still have work to do. But this is what a neighborhood looks like when people stand together. Cheers broke out, and for once they weren't laced with tension or polite nods. They were real. I stood at the edge of the crowd, arms crossed, watching the sunset spill gold over the lake. A few people came by to shake my hand. One guy said, "You set the fire that lit the fuse." I just nodded. I wasn't looking for credit. I was looking for peace, and now, finally, it felt like we had it. Brenda's court date was set for the following month. She faced serious time, and the DA made it clear they'd be pursuing restitution. The neighborhood had already hired an attorney to file a civil suit for damages. Between the criminal charges and the pending lawsuits, she'd be tied up in court for years. But none of that mattered as much as what was happening now. The fences that had been put up out of suspicion and fear were coming down literally and figuratively. Conversations started at mailboxes instead of through lawyer letters. The kayak rack got rebuilt and expanded. No one fined anyone over it, and my deck, it stayed exactly the way it was. Every plank, every board, every inch of it legal, clean, and now, finally, mine without someone watching it with a clipboard and a grin that never reached her eyes. The lake was quiet again. Just the way it was meant to be. 3 weeks after Brenda's arrest, the neighborhood had entered what Marlene started calling the recovery era. The community center buzzed with energy again, not with dread, but with planning. There were bake sale flyers pinned up next to landscaping schedules. Someone had even suggested organizing a lakeside concert series. And for once, nobody objected. I had just finished installing a new weatherproof cabinet for my fishing tackle near the dock when a black SUV with government tags eased into my driveway. A tall man in a gray blazer stepped out, followed by a woman in a pale blue shirt with a leather portfolio clutched under her arm. They introduced themselves as investigators from the State Inspector General's office. "We're conducting a broader audit," the man explained. "Turns out your HOA isn't the only one with a paper trail that leads to Brenda Whitmore." I leaned on the railing, curious. "You're telling me she was involved with other associations?" "Not directly," the woman said, flipping open her portfolio. "But she's one of 3 individuals tied to a consulting firm that's been pressuring smaller HOAs to adopt stricter enforcement policies. On paper, it looks like a policy advisory group. But in practice, they've been funneling fines and compliance service fees into private accounts." "And she wasn't acting alone," I crossed my arms. "So this goes beyond Lake Pine." The man nodded. "Way beyond. We traced payments from 2 other neighborhoods where residents were fined for absurd violations, one for having a hummingbird feeder, another for installing a motion sensor light. In both cases, the fines were paid into the same dummy account we found connected to Brenda's safe." A chill ran through me, not from fear, but from realizing how close we'd come to becoming part of a much larger scheme. "What do you need from me?" I asked. "Just your permission to cite the footage you provided and your original statement," the woman said. "It helps us establish a pattern of behavior." I signed the release. They thanked me and left, heading straight to the next neighborhood on their list. Later that afternoon, Marlene stopped by with a box full of old HOA records rescued from the storage closet Brenda had once commandeered. She dropped it on my porch and pulled the lid off. "You're not going to believe what we found behind the holiday decorations." Inside were receipts for purchases the HOA never approved, gas station snacks, a designer handbag, a Bluetooth speaker, and a subscription to a luxury wine club. All paid for with the community's money. Marlene shook her head. Apparently, she considered that a board wellness investment. I pulled out one of the forms. She labeled this as strategic morale enhancement. "That's not even the weirdest one," she said, handing me a handwritten invoice. "This one's for a discretionary consultation fee to someone named Charles B. We think it's her dog." I stared at the note. She paid her dog for consulting work. $35 a week. We both laughed, but it didn't last long. The absurdity was funny until you remembered every dollar came from residents trying to live in peace. The board met again that weekend to finalize the community's new charter amendments. I sat in as a guest. The room had a different energy now, no tension, no posturing, just people trying to fix what had been broken. Marlene passed around a binder. These are the new transparency rules. Every expenditure over $50 must be logged and posted within 72 hours. All fines must be approved by a 3-member peer committee before issuance, and monthly financial statements will be distributed to every homeowner. The changes passed unanimously, then Martin cleared his throat. There's one more thing. Given what we now know about the firm Brenda was connected to, we're recommending that the HOA formally file a complaint with the State Attorney General's office. Not just for fraud, but for conspiracy. There was a pause before an older gentleman near the end of the table, a former school bus mechanic named Leo, nodded. She tried to turn this place into her personal fiefdom. If we don't report it, someone else will suffer the same. The motion passed. The complaint was filed the next day. Around the same time, the district attorney's office announced that Brenda's case would be expanded. Not only was she being charged locally, but now she was facing additional felony charges at the state-level: fraudulent misappropriation of public funds, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, and falsification of financial documents under the Community Governance Act. Marlene called me that night. "You're not going to believe this," she said. "They're bringing in a forensic tech to testify that Brenda altered timestamps on violation records. She made it look like people were warned before being fined, but the emails were all backdated." She was building her own little empire, I said. And now it's crumbling. A month later, the trial began. It wasn't a spectacle, no cameras, no drama, just a quiet courtroom filled with residents, board members, and a few stone-faced auditors. The prosecution laid everything out with chilling efficiency. The fake consulting firm, the dummy landscaping company, the altered records, the missing funds. When the judge asked Brenda how she pleaded, she didn't look up. Her voice was flat. Guilty? The restitution order came first. She'd have to repay every dollar she stole, down to the last cent. Then came the sentence: 3 years in a minimum security facility, with 5 years of probation and a permanent ban from serving on any HOA board in the state. Afterward, the judge addressed the gallery. This case is a reminder that even small communities can be vulnerable to abuse of power, but it's also a reminder that vigilance and unity can stop that abuse. Outside the courthouse, a small group of neighbors gathered. No one celebrated. No one gloated. It wasn't about victory, it was about closure. Martin walked up beside me. "You know what I keep thinking about," he said. "That first board meeting when she convinced us to let her streamline enforcement. We thought she was just thorough." "She was building a trap," I replied. "One violation at a time." We stood there a moment longer, watching the courthouse doors swing closed behind her. Back at Lake Pine, things settled into a new rhythm. The community garden, once nearly bulldozed by Brenda for aesthetic nonconformity, was thriving. The kayak racks were full. Wind chimes tinkled on porches without fear of citation. One evening, while I was cleaning fish at the edge of the dock, a young couple walked by with their toddler in tow. They waved, and I waved back. The kid pointed at the lake and giggled as a heron glided low across the water. It struck me then what we'd really reclaimed. Not just our rights, not just our money, but the simple, uninterrupted quiet of living. The freedom to sit on your own deck and breathe without worrying who's peeking through the fence or tallying up imaginary rule violations. Marlene stopped by later that night with a jar of pickled okra and a grin that looked more like relief than triumph. "We finally got the last of the reimbursement checks out," she said. "Everyone who paid into Brenda's slush fund, fully refunded." I popped the lid and took a bite. "Tastes like justice." She laughed, and this time it wasn't tinged with frustration or exhaustion, just peace. "So," she said, "you ever think about joining the board for real?" I raised an eyebrow. "You trying to ruin my retirement? We could use someone who knows how to hold a line." I looked out over the water. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving a soft lavender glow across the lake. "Maybe," I said, "but only if you promise no clipboards." "Ever? Deal." We sat there for a while, talking about nothing important, the kind of nothing that only exists when the storm's past and the air is finally still. And for the first time in a long while, Lake Pine felt like home again.